Welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Duran. I'm a Washington-based foreign policy analyst, and I'm here today thanks to the generosity of the Turkish United States Business Council, and I'm here to talk with Akim Alptekin. Hi, Akim. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm good. Good to see you.
Akim, for the benefit of our viewers, let me tell you a little bit about yourself. First of all, you are a board member of the Turkish-U.S. Business Council. You graduated from the University of Utrecht in Law and Economics in 2001. You, after that, went on a fellowship to the United States House Foreign Relations Committee from 2002 to 2003. You worked there with the famous Congressman Tom Lantos. You are, of course, also a Dutch citizen, and after that, you worked in the Dutch Parliament during the Dutch EU presidency, and you were a fellow in the Counterterrorism Subdirectorate of the Interpol headquarters in Lyon, France. Following that experience, you went on to become a very successful entrepreneur in 2006. And among other achievements, you're known as the first Turk with an aviation industry investment in the United States, for which you received the Commercial Leadership Award from the American Turkish Council. You were recognized also as a Young Society leader by the American Turkish Society, and you served as the chairman of Turkey's oldest bilateral business council, that is the one under whose auspices we are speaking today, from 2015 through 2017. You're known for your efforts to boost the transatlantic relationship and to bolster the commercial aspect of a decades-long U.S.-Turkish relationship. You are also, of course, more famous lately as the Dutch-Turkish businessman who hired the company of General Mike Flynn and got wrapped up into all of the Russiagate business. But that's not why we're here today. Today we're going to talk about U.S.-Turkish relations, and of course this is a very important day because 4 years ago today there was a coup attempt in Turkey. And I think you and I probably agree that Americans especially don't fully understand, or I would say many Americans don't fully understand what happened on that day 4 years ago, but even more importantly, what it means to patriotic Turks like yourself. So let me just start by asking you to remind us what happened in Turkey 4 years ago today.
Thank you, Mike. As you said, it's still largely misunderstood in the West what a pivotal moment in the history of modern Turkey that day was. Turkey suffered a national trauma that for the Turkish psyche, for the psyche of the Turkish people, was comparable maybe to 9/11. But in many ways, it was worse because it was not an isolated terrorist attack, but it was a coordinated group within the Turkish armed forces that tried to violently overthrow the democratically elected government and seize control of government. And we had armored brigades involved. We had Navy, Coast Guard involved. We had about 24 F-16s that in major cities started bombing major infrastructures like police headquarters, even parliament. So imagine something like this happening in the United States where F-16s bomb Capitol Hill and special forces storm the White House. It's something that you would only see in a very far-fetched Hollywood movie, but it happened that day. And it's something that we're still trying to cope with. And as you said, I think it's important that our friends in the United States understand what really happened and how it affected us.
Now, there's a misperception in some circles that this coup attempt was carried out by secular nationalist Kemalists against Islamists. I mean, this is a pattern that we've seen in the past in Turkey, and I think I can reasonably assume that that is not that's not what happened, and it's certainly not how you see it.
Oh, that's exactly right, Mike. I mean, what I say will initially come across as something out of a Dan Brown novel for most American viewers. But it's really what happened. The central nervous system of this coup was executed by members of a religious cult. It's very difficult to describe them in a few words only, but it's the movement known as the Gulen movement. We call them the Gulen terror organization, FETÖ. They have been infiltrating in Turkish judiciary, Turkish national police, and the Turkish military for decades now. And the climax was basically 4 years ago on July 15th, when they finally tried to use this power to overtake control of Turkey's government.
So tell us a little bit about Gulen, the head of this cult.
Yes, I think to make people understand a little bit what this organization is about, we have 2 clips ready to go. So maybe we could watch these clips first, and then I'll comment a little bit.
Why don't you just describe what's in the clips a little bit before we show them?
Yeah, so this organization has a front face that comes across as a very tolerant, peace-loving organization that promotes interfaith dialogue and is only interested in education. They have about 2,000 schools globally in 160 countries. Approximately 150 of them are in the United States. They have charter schools even on U.S. Air Force bases. So they try to be known with this front office face that they have, all these organizations that are either education related or organizations that promote interfaith dialogue. In reality, especially in Turkey, this organization has been slowly but surely infiltrating into state apparatus, especially the police and the judiciary and the military. And these 2 clips will show you a little bit what the vision of Fethullah Gulen, the leader of this organization, is, how they went about it, what their main strategy was. Because you will hear it from the horse's mouth, and it's subtitled, and I think it's important that people see that.
Before we turn to those clips, let me just emphasize what I think is one of the most amazing aspects of this organization is that Gulen himself is in Pennsylvania, and will not be, and has been, the Turkish government has tried many times to extradite him to Turkey, and the U.S. government has refused. I think in terms of us trying to bridge what I would call the perception gap between Americans and Turks on this issue, I think we have to make sure that all the Americans understand that the guy who, as far as Turks are concerned, launched this coup is an Islamist cult leader, and he's in the Poconos Mountains in Pennsylvania, seemingly under the protection of the U.S. government.
Exactly, and I'll comment more on this right after we see the clips. That was the first clip. We have a second one. Let's just see that as well.
So what's the significance there of what we just saw?
I mean, I'll read one more statement that he made in the 90s that was televised as well, and it's again from his mouth, but to sort of put things into perspective of what we just saw. These are sermons that he gives to his followers. Most of these sermons, they now try to hide. They try to get rid of them from internet. Of course, we try to make sure that they stay there. But he says to his followers that you must move in the arteries of the system without anyone noticing your existence until you reach all the power centers. Until the conditions are right, the followers must continue like this. If they do something prematurely, which I believe they did on July 15th, by the way, the world will crush our heads and Muslims will suffer everywhere. I mean, this is sort of, I just wanted to put this into perspective because these are things that the United States public does not see about Fethullah Gulen. The only thing they see is about 200 front organizations with beautiful names like Alliance for Shared Values, Rainbow Foundation, things like that. And these charter schools receive approximately $750 million in United States taxpayers' dollars, Mike, every year.
These are American charter schools that his organization has set up, and,
exactly.
and they're receiving taxpayer money, in which
exactly.
they are presenting themselves as having a very ecumenical, diverse, tolerant worldview.
exactly.
And they're doing it in order to insinuate people into the power structure, so when the time is right, they can act.
Exactly. So you have a guy who went to the United States as a fugitive from Turkey. So this is long before the current government was in power. In 1999, this imam fled to an indictment in Turkey and moved to the United States as a fugitive. He was originally denied residency in the United States, but he received references from several high-level individuals in the United States and got that original negative decision overturned. And he's now a legal permanent resident in the United States, living. Imagine this for the American public. You have this cult leader, an Islamist cult leader who pretends to talk to the prophet, to his followers, living in a fortified compound in the Poconos Mountains, directing his followers globally, and estimates of his global business empire, his wealth range between, the lowest estimate is about $20 billion. The highest is about $200 billion. And he has followers that are able to pull off a coup attempt in the second largest NATO army, Mike. And you would think that this is much more relevant than this isolated small Turkish domestic issue. I would think anyone interested in regional and even global peace and security should be concerned about an Islamist organization, a cult, a criminal organization that has the power and the audacity to try and do a coup in the second largest NATO country in the world. I mean, this is as you said, there's a big perception gap about what happened that night. But I think it's very important for the American public to understand this, because the American public is funding this organization. I mean, $750 million a year is a lot of money, and they're buying political influence with it.
You put out a lot there. Let me focus in on a couple of issues that you raised. Sure. Just one of them. Let me first quote to emphasize what you're saying. An article that Dexter Filkins, who writes for The Atlantic, wrote. He wrote a good article on the coup attempt in Gulen, and I just want to read one little quote from one of Gulen's followers, who said that a man appeared at a service. This is a sermon that Gulen is giving, or no, at a service of Gulenis. With a shoe that had been worn by Gulen. And he says, people were so excited, they stripped the leather from the shoe and boiled it for a long time. Then they cut the leather into pieces and they ate it. Now, this is a kind of thing that I think a kind of religiosity that most Americans are not familiar with. I mean, in the Western tradition, you kind of have to go back to the Middle Ages when there was saint worship. Still have a little bit of it with reverence for relics. I'm a Catholic. There's a reverence for relics within the Catholic Church and so on. But you don't see people going and taking the garments of holy men and eating them, food that holy men have left behind, and bits of scraps of food and eating it. But this is common in the Gulen movement. Am I right?
You're exactly right, and I'll tell you that it's not common for the Turkish public either. So it was very difficult originally to make the Turkish public understand what these people were about. So there was a small group of people that were courageous enough to write about it. Most of these authors have been either killed, assassinated, or were thrown in prison on trumped-up charges. So there was never really much known about them. But what you just described is a very standard practice in the Gulen movement.
I think the other thing that is hard, you said at the beginning that this has all the makings of a Dan Brown novel. And I think it's hard for Americans to realize the level of the duplicity, and the secret nature of this conspiratorial organization until they've seen it with their own eyes. I mean, I know the first time I saw it really closely, I invited a Turkish journalist who was hostile to the Gulen movement to an organization that I work for, and a Gulenist journalist in Washington, who I thought was a friend of mine, and I had no idea that he was a Gulenist. He sent an email to my boss and said basically that this guy was in effect, that the guy that I had invited, the other journalist that I had invited, was in effect a Nazi and a horrible anti-Semite. And how was it possible that my organization was hosting such a despicable human being? And then at the same moment, and literally the same moment that he's sending the email to my boss, he wrote in Turkish an article in Turkey accusing my organization of being a hotbed of Zionism and of anti-Turkish sentiment. So like the exact opposite statements simultaneously. So it's not like he just emphasized one element, of his views over another, like you're familiar with people doing all the time. It was just, one message for one audience, another message for another audience. Until you've seen people doing that, it's really kind of hard to believe.
I mean, just to continue on this two-faced approach that they have. If you look at their record in the United States, their known record, sort of the face that they show in Congress, because they do a lot of congressional lobbying on a state level and on the federal level as well. They always talk about interfaith dialogue, and they're very pro-Israel, etc. But here you have, again, a statement from the same article that you mentioned, where in his book called From Chapter to Chapter, it was published in '95, he accuses the Jewish tribe of developing ideas such as communism and ideas that seduce the world into disaster. So he says this intelligent tribe has put forth many things throughout history in the name of science and thought, but these have always been offered in the form of poisoned honey. He continues, Jews will maintain their existence until the apocalypse, and shortly before the apocalypse, their mission of acting as the coil spring for humanity's progress will come to an end, and they will prepare their end with their own hands. So this is an anti-Semite, woman-hating Islamist cult, of which the leader somehow is not only able to live in the United States, despite being accused of masterminding and directing a coup attempt in a NATO country, but his network of schools received almost $1 billion in U.S. taxpayers' money. And I'll bet you that most Americans don't know this and will not like it either if they
No,
found out.
I'm sure they don't. Why don't we? You just said you know that the United States is allowing this, and earlier you said that there were high-level individuals who supported his um, visa request after it had been denied. Do you have any idea about who those individuals are, and are you comfortable naming them if you do?
I mean, a lot of people. I am comfortable. I mean, a lot of people. I mean, these names are public. It's a former ambassador, Morton Abramovich is one of them. The former CIA officer,
Former U.S.
ambassador
ambassador to Turkey. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And a former CIA case officer, Graham Fuller, is another.
Graham Fuller, I think he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was the head of the CIA station in Ankara at one point. I think.
Yes, at a time that the CIA was mobilizing the idea to counter communism in the region through an Islamic green belt, as they called it. So that would, Fuller was one of the masterminds behind this idea of countering communism with Islamism, basically. And we've seen how well that worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you can see it doesn't necessarily have to be communism either, because I mean, one of the things that the United States has always found attractive about Turkey is the blend of an Islamic identity with democracy, and of course, Turkey is a NATO ally, and so in the post-Cold War world, where there's competition between the U.S. and Russia and China for Central Asian Turkic republics. The Gulen movement also has, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's very active in Africa and has schools all over Africa. So a guy like that who has a network of incredibly devoted followers would be very valuable to an intelligence organization that wants to keep tabs on what's going on, in these areas. Wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. You might remember the embassy bombings in Tanzania, I believe, in 2 different locations in Africa in 1997. These were areas very difficult to infiltrate for an organization like the CIA or any Western intelligence organization. And of course, after these embassy attacks, the place was swamped with intelligence officers. And, one of the infrastructures that they would use is these schools and these organizations that the Gulen network had. From my perspective, it's understandable that an intelligence organization plugs into organizations like this when they have to. What is less understandable for me is that they continue to work with them even when their use is outdated, and they do so at the detriment of the democracy in a NATO country. And I think at some point this has got to stop. Again, I can't know for certain what exactly their relationship is, but I know I've spoken to many people, including U.S. Officials, that confirmed this relationship in one way or another, and it made sense at the time, but I don't think it does anymore. And they're saying that there's not enough evidence to extradite him. I studied law and I worked in law enforcement. I think there's a lot more evidence to indict this guy or to extradite him than there's against me or General Flynn, but I might be mistaken. So at the very least, they could cancel his visa. I mean, what is so important about this imam who's living in the Poconos Mountains that you basically rebuff 80 million Turks? Because in Turkey, this is a national issue. It's not just the Erdogan government who believes he should be extradited and brought to justice. It's probably the single issue in Turkish politics where all the political parties, including the sort of the fringe, marginal, ethnic parties, all align on, is that this man has to be brought to justice. So why rebuff 80 million Turks just to keep this Islamist, woman-hating, anti-Semite protected there in the Poconos Mountains? They could just cancel his visa.
Well, that's an important point that you raise, and I think we need to stress it. Seeing as how I think we agree that there's this perception gap between that needs to be bridged between Americans and Turks today, that this is not simply a disagreement between the Turkish government and the American government. That a very broad base of Turkish opinion regards Gulen as a terrorist and as the architect of the July coup attempt.
It's really like yes. Imagine after 9/11, it becomes clear that a NATO country, a NATO ally of the United States, is hosting and protecting and refusing to extradite Osama bin Laden. How would that resonate in the United States?
No, exactly. That's a great analogy, because did we have absolute proof that could hold up in a court of law that bin Laden ordered 9/11?
I can assure you there's much more proof of involvement of Gulenist officers than of bin Laden. I mean, usually that's the entire point of an organization like this. Usually there is no smoking gun. But it's about, I mean, if you ask most of the American officials in an off-the-record conversation, whether they know or believe that it was Gulenists who masterminded and executed this coup attempt, although they were supported by other elements, of course, most of them would confirm. I mean, most people I spoke to in private confirmed that they believe the central nervous system of this coup was executed by Gulenist forces. So
Yeah,
it's mind-blowing to me.
I mean, no, I have no problem believing it. But I do also understand that that if you haven't spent a little time studying this organization, some of the initial claims sound crazy, but you have to read a few articles about people eating his shoes and so on to understand the devotion. I heard a fantastic story from a Turkish ambassador who I don't want to name him because I don't know if he's comfortable being named, but anyway, he was in his job at the time of the coup attempt, and he was shocked to find out, totally shocked to find out that some of his favorite members of his staff were Gulenists, and it all made sense to him afterwards. They were younger people, and one of his particular favorites was a young woman, and she was on many issues incredibly efficient, talented, and reliable, but on other issues wasn't. And he just explained it to himself as the younger generation, the millennials, they don't understand. He kind of tried to take her under his wing to explain to her how you behave in a hierarchy and so on. Later on, after the coup, she came to him just before she was arrested, and she admitted that she was a Gulenist. She apologized. She said that she had always respected him, and she hoped that he would forgive her, that he had been a very good boss, and that she did not want to be disloyal to him. But she said, you have to understand, I came from a very poor family. They sent me to good schools, to good high school. They paid for my college. They got me my job. They got them very early. They identified talented people. They trained them. They got them their jobs. They helped out their families, so that they have their hooks into them, and they're also watching them all the time. So they quickly weed out the people who are skeptics about the organization and so on. They find the ones who are loyal. They recognize them as loyal early on, and they groom them and then put them in positions of responsibility. So what he learned was that when she was being when she was not being responsive to his instructions, it was because she was being told from Pennsylvania not to do it, because there were issues. He was in a country where there were some important Islamic shrines, which the Turkish government was supporting, but the Turkish government was in competition with the Gulenist movement. The Gulenist movement wanted to control these shrines, and so whenever he would tell her to go, give money for the upkeep of the shrine, or to go to some ceremony or whatever, she wouldn't do it. And he didn't put two and two together. But what she was doing, everything that she was being told to do, she would explain to her handlers, and then the orders would come back from Pennsylvania about what to do and what not to do. So it was a shadow government, basically.
I mean, Turkey's reaction to the coup has been criticized a lot. And of course, we did make mistakes, and some innocent people were implicated in the beginning and then later released, etc. Because when something as traumatic as this happened, when your own F-16 start bombing your parliament, I mean, any government chooses to err on the side of caution when they try to save the state, basically. So tens of thousands of people were originally implicated. A lot of them were later vindicated, basically, that they had nothing to do with it. But a lot of them, like you said, admitted that they were members. So they basically, for years, they lived this weird life where you always have this double life that you have to manage. And when this traumatic event happened, and they were sort of finally exposed, a lot of people also came out and admitted it. I think it's partly because they felt they had no choice anymore, but I think it's partly that they felt guilty as well, and people sometimes feel the need to come out.
Actually, it's interesting now that you mention it. I realized that I didn't tell the story accurately. Because he told me, and the ambassador told me, and it didn't click what he was saying, that when she came to him, she did not say, "I'm a Gulenist." What she said was, "I want you to know that I am a member of, or I have a relationship with, a prohibited organization." She did not name it.
As recently as a few weeks ago, we had the lieutenant, basically the right-hand man of the chief of military intelligence, arrested. So this is as recent as a couple of weeks ago. And this guy himself came out. He came out and admitted, he sort of surrendered to the state. Probably he had enough. He had enough of all these years of living in fear. He also, in his first testimony, he says, that he expected to be arrested every day. And at some point, he just couldn't bear the pressure anymore. But imagine, as recently as a couple of weeks ago, the right-hand man of military intelligence in the Second NATO Army was a member of a secretive, shadowy cult that has a parallel command structure. You would think that this is also extremely relevant for the United States, because Turkey is integrated in the NATO system.
Well, there's a lot of embarrassment to go around now. Why is it that the Turkish government itself didn't root them out earlier? How come? Why were they able to infiltrate so deeply?
I mean, there's several reasons to that. You have to understand that when this government came to power in 2002, there was a less democratic culture in Turkey. It was a fiercely secular establishment. That was very much against someone out of the system that is not part of the establishment being elected. This Justice and Development Party, AK Party, under the leadership of Erdogan, it came to power and was really a landslide victory, but also a major upset in Turkish politics. And when they came to power, the establishment in the judiciary, security bureaucracy, in many other places, was unwilling to work with them. And the only other organized entity that was able to coordinate human resources and other issues were these followers of Fethullah Gulen, basically. And they managed to to dupe not just this government, consecutive governments in Turkey, the same way that they're doing now in the United States. So they did a lot of lobbying here. They saw this front office face of them that is always more benign than their real intentions. They never come out and talk about their desire to gather more power and centralize it in their own hands. They always talk about dialogue and tolerance and things like that. So it was very difficult to see them for what they are, what they were, and the few people that did see them. These were mostly intelligence officers in the police network, in the military, in the judiciary. They were all arrested in what's now known as the Ergenekon and Sledgehammer case. They were arrested on trumped-up charges. Evidence was fake. They used, documents were left on people's computers, supposedly written in a certain year. We later found out that these, Microsoft Word fonts that were used did not even exist in that year. So it takes a lot of time. It's very similar to some of the things I believe we're seeing in the United States today. But we probably shouldn't talk about that.
Yeah, let's leave that. How many controversies can we tackle in one in 1 hour?
Let me go back to the evidence of their involvement in the night of the coup, Mike. So there's this guy. He's a theology student in a very obscure university in an obscure town in Turkey, in Sakarya. His name is Adil Öksüz. He was arrested at the night of the coup in the vicinity of the airbase where most of the coup activities were coordinated. So imagine the coup fails. Most of these soldiers, major roadblocks, etc., surrender. Pivotal events, CNN is reporting it, etc. Most people in their right minds are either fighting off these putschists or are in the safety of their homes trying to keep their family safe. But this theology professor is like 500 miles away from where his home should be and where he supposedly should be teaching theology. And he's found in the near vicinity of this airbase, basically running away from the airbase. So the police picks up this guy and they say, "What are you doing in here?" He says, I was looking at land plots. He's pretending to be interested in real estate, and that's why he was there that particular night at 6 a.m. in the morning. And more interestingly, whoever they picked up in the vicinity of these air bases, especially the civilians, they all had the same answer. Like, "What are you doing here?" "I was looking at land plots." So that's probably what they agreed to say or whatever. So this guy,
at least they admitted it was a plot. Sorry, it was a bad pun.
That was a good one, actually. So let me, for the audience, but also for the people, the United States, the American officials that say there's no evidence of Gulen's involvement. So this guy, Adil Öksüz, who was an assistant professor, as I said, he has gone abroad 109 times in the period between 2002 and 2016. So that means he traveled abroad every 45 days. A guy who has like $1,000 salary, I believe it was like $1,300 salary or something like that. So in the last 25 months, so in the last 2 years leading up to the coup, he gone abroad 12 times. That's every other month, okay? And he flew to New York from Istanbul on 2 months before the coup, late May 2016, and then returned on the 18th. So 8 days later, he flies to Johannesburg from Istanbul, stays there for 3 days and flies back. On September 16th, he flies to South Africa again, and then from there to the United States. And then 9 days later, he comes back to Turkey. I'm just saying this for the audience to understand. This is
and am I right to assume? Am I right to assume that when he went from South Africa to the United States, that he went to Pennsylvania to the Poconos?
Oh, we have plenty of evidence, and we have images that we will show you. So on October, he flies to Kuwait. He goes from there to Germany, all in the same month. And finally, March 17, he flies to New York again, stays there for 4 days. On June 20th, he flies to New York again, stays for 4 days and returns. So why would this theology professor have this very busy schedule of flying? What possible personal business could this man have, right? Especially with his salary. Now, there's a few pictures I'd like our technical guys to show, if they could, where this guy is praying together with Fethullah Gulen. So there's no denying that this guy is a follower. If we could put up these pictures, please. Unless we have a technical difficulty. I think it's coming up. In the meantime, I'll just tell you a little bit more on what.
Well, let me just point out one sort of I think obvious fact, but I think it needs emphasizing, is that the organization is clever. It understands that electronic communications will be monitored, and so you have all of these activist agents are going back and forth because they have to pass everything by word of mouth and talk to the man himself.
I mean, exactly. The American government has records of this man coming in and out 110 times, of course, and also him flying to Pennsylvania and visiting the Poconos Mountains. And he visits Fethullah Gulen just a few days before the coup. So on July 11th, so the coup is on July 15th. On July 11th, he flies business class to New York. And after an 11-hour flight, Mike, he only stays for 2 days and then returns again on July 13th. And there are a couple of guys like him that are known associates of Fethullah Gulen who are on these same flights, Mike. And we have camera footage of these guys walking in these separate airports, some of them together, some of them apart. And when they were interrogated, they all deny even knowing each other. It's possible. I mean, they sat together, they coordinated everything together. There's plenty of evidence, but they just keep denying it. And there's absolutely no doubt what these guys were doing. So on the morning of July 16th, after he has been arrested, they bring him to this, to this prison, basically. And at some point, he says he needs to use the bathroom. So a few moments later, a military police officer uses the same cubicle that he uses. And while trying to get a tissue, he finds there's a device inside. So they immediately check the cameras, who was there last time, who used that cubicle, and it's this guy. So they ask him, what's this device? Let me see what his answer was. He again denies it was his, of course, but it's a GPS navigation device. So here you see him for the viewers. It's the guy in the front. The guy in the back is also a Gulen, is called Kemal Batmaz, another civilian who was seen in the hallways of the airbase that was coordinating the coup, giving out orders to guys in uniform. So why would a civilian give out these orders? Here you see, if we can keep this image for a while, you see Fethullah Gulen. This is the guy that was praised by President Clinton and people like Graham Fuller, to the extent that he's still able to stay in the United States. And I think at his right, you see Adil Öksüz, or no, at his left, you see him praying with him. So this guy, the device he put in the restroom turns out to be a GPS navigation device. Okay, so you have a theology professor who's caught right next to the airbase that coordinated the coup, who claims to be there looking because he's interested in buying land plots, which are not for sale, by the way. Who then, the first thing he does, I mean, it comes right out of the spy novel, is asking to use the bathroom, and he puts a GPS device into the toilet seat. I mean, it doesn't get much crazier than this. And there's 1,000 stories like this, Mike. I mean, this is his arrest picture. So by the time this guy appears before the judge, all this evidence, like this device, it's lost. The device is gone. The judge somehow, imagine a day like that. There's just been a coup attempt. This guy's been arrested there. Would you let him go as a judge? You would at least keep him, for a couple of days. This judge, decides it's probably best to let this guy go. Of course, he's picked up with the last image we see is him being picked up by a journalist who worked for a Gulenist newspaper. Okay, he picks him up in an Audi car. We have several pictures of this car, and then he vanishes. So we don't know where this guy is, but I'll bet you, if you would visit the Poconos Mountains, that's one of the places you probably find him.
But now, the implication from the story that the judge himself was also a Gulenist?
I believe so. Yes.
Yes, because they have infiltrated the judicial system, the judiciary, the police, the military, and journalism as well.
You know why? And I think you can relate to this. You've worked for government. If you're a judge that day, that particular morning, you're not going to release anyone. It's too bloody risky because you risk getting accused of being a Gulenist because you release these guys by people like me. Okay, so you would not release anyone. If I was a judge that day, I would hold on to everyone. I mean, you're not going to release a guy who was found running away from the airbase that that coordinated the coup. I mean, to me, it does not make sense unless you're a judge who was went to one of their schools, who received his first job thanks to these guys who first entered the university because of stolen exam questions that they provided him. So he's already compromised. He does not have the luxury to say no to them. To say no to them already means the end of his life anyway. So I mean, it's like a suicide bomber. He pushes the button because otherwise his terrorist master will push the button. I mean, and then his family will not get any money. You see my point? But either way, he dies.
I do. We've got about 10 minutes left, and there's one really major issue that I think we need to talk about. I think this also relates to your own personal biography a bit. And that's the influence of the Gulenists in Washington D.C. And how it has played a role in creating or in helping to create the perception gap that we've got now between Ankara and Washington. You mentioned before that there was this alignment between the government and the Gulenists, and the government saw them as allies. The relationship falls apart at a certain point. But part of that alliance between the government and the Gulenists, as I understand it, and you can correct me if you have a different view, is that the government kind of handed over significant elements of Turkish-U.S. relations, in particular the kind of people-to-people public diplomacy, public relations, because the Gulenists had such a presence in journalism and so on, because they had these schools. They used to. I was even offered. I never took them up on it, but I was offered these junkets where they would bring you over. They'd pay your way, take you over to Turkey, and go around and see lovely sights in Turkey, and Turkish, just under the banner of ecumenical outreach, Muslim Christian understanding, but also just Turkish heritage, cultural activities, and Turkish American friendship. So there was a huge network that they had. They had Turks on the ground in the United States, and still do, and they had a lot of American friends who had no idea that they had been dealing with Gulenists. So if you
I know many
talk
congressmen and congresswomen who went on these trips not knowing who financed them. They did not know that they were going on a trip financed by an Islamist criminal organization. It really is outrageous. But look, I think what happened is, I agree largely with what you said, but what happens, like any other government, what the Turkish government does is all its lobbying efforts, its formal lobbying efforts, go through the embassy, as it should. That basically means in a city as important as Washington, it means you hire a PR company, you hire a few lobbyists, you hire a law firm who help you sort of do all the official business that you have. But there's something else called, diaspora efforts and civil society efforts, or businessmen like me who then go out and hire lobbyists and other people for their own companies, etc. And there's an overlap here. What happened is that these guys, they had a huge infrastructure. They had all these different foundations. And because they're based in the United States, they suffice with registering under the Lobbying Disclosure Act. which is not the Foreign Agents Registry Act that we have to register under as foreigners, because anyway, you know the story. So it's largely unclear what happens with the millions of dollars that these guys spent. At the time, they were spending these dollars to improve Turkish-American understanding and to boost this relationship. So no government is going to say no to that. So it was a very logical alliance in the sense that, like our organization, the Turkey-United Business Council, we lobby in the United States, and we do so formally, and we do so through professional companies. And the government is pleased, I think, with these efforts. Why would they not be pleased with these efforts? So it's really a civil society effort that the government at the time applauded. But what happened, you're exactly right, it turns into a sort of, not a laziness, but because someone is already doing certain aspects of the work that the government should be doing, the government does not want to spend taxpayers' dollars on it anymore. It's already being done. The negative side effect of this is that you sort of leave this skill set, because with this work, you also generate a lot of experience. As you know, DC has a very different system, unique system of its own. And these Gulenis, over the years, learned how to manipulate the system in a way that a diplomat who's stationed there for a couple of years simply cannot. So you're exactly right. The problem is that all this infrastructure and all these millions of dollars and it's basically U.S. taxpayers' dollars, because what they do, and 60 Minutes did a show on this, and there's several FBI investigations about this, about visa fraud and rent fraud that they're engaged in. What they do is they take these subsidies for these charter schools, and they're supposed to be paying school rent for the buildings as well as salaries for the teachers. But most of the teachers are Gulenis that are imported from Turkey. So I mean, they can't find an English teacher in the United States, so they bring them over from Turkey, and they skim off their salaries. So guesstimates are that between 20 to 40% of that budget, of that almost $1 billion, skimmed off and flows back to the organization. And that's a lot of money, Mike, especially in DC. So if you have 200 front organizations, with all beautiful names and different rainbows, etc., who hire independently on a state level, on a federal level, lobbyists, PR firms, what happens, of course, is that you have much more power than one embassy building in DC, and that's working very much against the interest of this bilateral relationship. Yeah.
We've got 3.5 minutes left, and I just I don't want to end this. If you're comfortable, I'd just like to talk about your own personal experience in this. And once after the coup, this infrastructure that the Gulenists had set up in Washington and in the American media was turned against the Turkish government and turned against you to a certain extent as well. And I wonder if you might talk about that. But bear in mind, we've only got 3 minutes left.
Sure. I mean, on election day, as you know, Mike Flynn had an op-ed published in The Hill, I believe. And that op-ed, he basically equates the Gulen movement to Al-Qaeda. He says that they're very similar and that they should be treated as such. So imagine this imam, of which the picture we've just shown our viewers, he sits in this fortified compound in these Poconos Mountains, close to DC. He wakes up that morning feeling very comfortable because he's invested millions of dollars in the Clinton campaign, from the foundation to the campaign to people supporting her. And he feels he's bet on the right horse because he's been investing in that horse for many years. So come election day, this guy wakes up probably happy, thinking a new era is going to start for them, where someone very friendly to them will be in the White House. Probably soon after he woke up, a staffer brings him this op-ed where the right-hand man of the opposing candidate of Donald Trump basically says he's no different than Osama bin Laden and should be treated as such. I'm guessing he was not pleased that morning. And I think throughout that day, as it became more and more clear that Trump was actually winning the election, that it was not just displeasure, they became very stressed. And they became aggressive. And if you have all these millions and you're sitting there in that compound, you have all these PR companies working for you, what do you think is the order that he gave that day? Of course, he gave the order to target General Flynn and anyone associated with him. And then I think a large part of all the nonsense that we saw about General Flynn's involvement with Turkey was originated by these PR efforts of these Gulenists.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, the number of interests in the Middle East that were endangered by General Mike Flynn becoming the national security advisor was huge. If you were the Iranian government and you saw Flynn coming in, you're going to be very upset. And if you were the Gulenists, you're going to be very upset. And if you're the Obama administration and you know that he wants to dismantle your signature foreign policy legacy, which was outreach to Iran and distancing the Turks and the Israelis, then also you're going to want to get him. And
actually, as a final note, final note, Mike, what is interesting is that a lot of people who served in the Obama administration and in the, in previous administrations, U.S. administrations, consecutive U.S. ambassadors who served in Turkey, you can actually go on WikiLeaks and read a decade of cables that these U.S. officials sent about the Gulen movement to D.C. So you have, political officers, economic officers, U.S. ambassadors, all expressing concern about this shadowy organization. And actually, it's U.S. officials talking about how they infiltrated Turkish intelligence apparatus, Turkish military. I mean, all these cables now are public through WikiLeaks. So what happened? Why are these officials not worried anymore about this shadowy force? Why did this shadowy force somehow, now that they broke off with Erdogan, now that Turkey no longer likes this organization, and now that they're no longer doing Turkey's bidding in DC, but doing someone else's bidding, why is it that nobody's concerned about them anymore? Except a few people like General Flynn.
No, it's a great point. Somehow they have managed to fly under the radar. I suspect that I know that there are lots of conspiracy theories in Turkey, or lots of theories in Turkey. I mean, this is a conspiratorial organization, so I shouldn't even put it like that. Where they think that the American government is actually targeting the Turkish government. My own guess at this is not so much that there's a real desire on the part of the Americans to use the Gulenist organization. My guess is, one, there's not a very clear understanding of what it is, and to the extent that there is an understanding, there's a realization that it would be very, very embarrassing to the United States to come clean about it. And so they'd prefer it. Lots of people would prefer that it just kind of went away. But we can't let that happen. It's very important to air all of this. They played a huge role in damaging U.S.-Turkish relations.
I mean, there might be families watching us who've suffered losses that day. There were, more than 240 people killed that day. There were thousands wounded, some of them permanently. And I mean, we owe it to these people to make sure that it doesn't just go away. And we will pursue this actively, and we will continue to research this organization and knocking on doors to make sure that people understand what they're really about.
No, it's good because they're still there. They may not be as effective as they were in the past, but they're still there. And I agree with what you said. I mean, this is a national security issue. It's an American national security issue. I certainly share your sentiments about the Turkish victims of this organization. I certainly believe that it has done great damage to Turkey, but it's also an American and a Western national security, American national security issue, and a national security issue for all major Western countries. We have to get this right, and we have. There's been a great unwillingness to actually look at it. So anyway, listen, I want to thank the Turkish U.S. Business Council for organizing this, and I want to thank you for all of your efforts. not to get too personal about it, but you yourself have paid a very steep personal price for your efforts to unmask this organization and do something about it. I don't know who I'm thanking you for. On behalf of the power vested in me by a grateful nation, I thank you, and I hope that you will be I know you will be vindicated, and I hope that vindication comes sooner rather than later for you and your family.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Okay, take care, and we'll be posting this on YouTube, and we will post links to some of the key documents that we've talked about.
Sure, great. That's great.
All right, thanks a lot, Akim.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Since 1985, we have been pursuing business opportunities throughout the world by embracing this motto: more trade. Everything began with these two words. It was then that the Turkish private sector united to adopt a joint vision, and I was given my name. Well, who am I? I am a business platform that is empowered by my founding institutions, business councils, counterpart organizations, and members pursuing business opportunities all around the world, uniting all of my stakeholders. I am DEİK. DEİK has become the locomotive organization of our private sector. 2019, Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. Well, what do I do? Exports, imports, inward and outward investments, manufacturing, and so much more. I establish new bonds and relations through business forums, B2B meetings, roundtable meetings, conferences, panel discussions, and summits across the world. I have been vigorously striving to strengthen the dynamics of the economy, steering the world's wind of change, and enhancing interactions within the private sector. Hence, I generate major contributions to my members and to the private sector with the mission I carry. I reunite Turkish business people living all around the world under a common objective. With each passing day, people, countries, and even the continents come closer. The balances of international trade are rapidly changing, while the world economy is also being reshaped. I am not trying to keep pace with this change. I am steering this change because I consider trade not as an instrument of war, but as a tool of developing societies, glamorizing the world, and contributing to the advancement of technologies that preserve and protect nature. Therefore, I am Turkey's global horizon. I am carrying Turkey's strength to the world. Now it is time to act together. I want to make business with you through my 146 business councils. I am a business platform empowered by my members. Because our mission is business diplomacy.